Think about how much money the Chamber of Commerce has, and think about how much they view Orin as a threat. That's actually pretty extraordinary. There's a big asymmetric threat there. He said something which I'll never forget in the formation of Fox News. He said, people don't want to be informed. They want to feel informed. A lot of people forget how insane politics was when senators were not directly elected. When they were elected through state legislatures, there was some crazy shenanigans happening in terms of buying off seats. And I mean, a lot of people don't know this. William Randolph Hearst, who was the newspaper baron, his father was one of the richest people in the state of California. He was a gold miner. He just randomly decided he wanted to be a senator. And he died as the United States from California. LBJ is probably the greatest politician of our time. It's not even fair to call FDR a politician because, honestly, he was a king.
Hi, welcome. This is the From the New World podcast. Today I'm speaking with Saagar Enjeti, the co-host and co-founder of Breaking Points with Crystal and Saagar, as well as a former White House correspondent. We discuss populism, why Trump's policies and Trump's campaign differ, the social media revolution in the journalism industry, and how AI will change even more. You'll be able to find his show, Breaking Points, which I listen to every week, either on YouTube with video or on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this show on. One more important announcement to make before I start the interview. This week is a very important week for me. If you don't know what I do for a day job, I stopped doing software engineering a while back, and right now I'm working on Alliance for the Future, a new single-issue AI policy think tank. And that think tank has a podcast attached to it. So you'll be able to find that tomorrow at the Alliance for the Future podcast. And if it's Tuesday or later that you're listening to this, hopefully that will be in the description as well. You can also, right now, donate to Alliance for the Future in order to keep AI free and open, as well as to encourage open source funding. Those are, in my view, two of the most important things I could be up to right now, and I hope you believe the same. So I'd be very grateful for any form of support you can offer, whether that's with a donation or by reaching out, which you can also do in the description. With all of that out of the way, enjoy my interview with Saagar Enjeti. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I think the main theme of this show is going to be, the divergence between what Trump did to kind of the policy space here in DC and the image that he has in the public. And I think a good way to jump into that is with, the IVF bill here in DC. Like, why don't, so the Republicans, the Democrats introduced a bill to kind of secure IVF. Why don't the Republicans just vote for it, right? They just all, say they're in favor of IVF.
Because of coalitional politics. Because they look for everybody likes to look at things in terms of general election, and that's not necessarily a bad frame if you're an individual consumer or something like that. But these guys have to survive primaries. They've got individual coalitions that they have to worry about. They've got the Susan B. Anthony organization. They can't be affording hits to their pro-life score. They've got individual churches, evangelicals. I mean, this is the most highly organized, probably coalition on the entire right. So for them, they've got to check their own power. And here's the other thing. If you're from Kansas, what political benefit do you really have from sponsoring or not sponsoring it? Now, how often do things go direct ballot initiative like abortion has been? It's very rare, right, that something like that happens. You have a relatively safe seat. And even if the vast majority of your constituents support it, sounds like something they're going to boot your ass out on for not sponsoring it either. So a lot of that, by the way, a lot of this dynamic affects the left too, right? In various other instances, particularly on immigration. And that's exactly why DC kind of works the way it does.
Yeah. You mentioned there that, the abortion movement, the pro-life movement is very well organized. For a more general audience, like what does that mean, right? What does that mean in practice? What are they doing that the other people aren't?
Well, number one, they vote, right? That's pretty important. A lot of people don't vote. In fact, most people don't vote. which I support. I think a lot of people shouldn't vote if they don't want to vote. I've often not voted, and people get mad about that. But hey, it's about conviction. And it's about whether or not something really drives you and moves you to go to the ballot box. So, for the thing is that the abortion movement, specifically the pro-life movement, I mean, you have to think about this is their number one issue. This is the thing they've said over and over again. I'm not talking about IVF, I'm talking about abortion specifically. They made this their number one issue for over 40 years. They were highly organized. They had the Federalist Society, they had the legal movement, they had all of this, and they never really cared about public opinion, which I respect. Insurgent movements like this, these are people who are dyed in the wool and they're going to get it done no matter what. Using their electoral coalition throughout the American South and within red states, on top of the political organization of a lot of these churches, they're able to drive out votes, drive out millions of dollars. They also have an incredible grassroots effort to pressure people both here in Washington and at home. So the March for Life, media never covers it. It was a massive, march here every year in Washington, D.C., sometimes up to 1 million or so people, and they all visit congressional offices. That's what real political organization looks like at a functional level.
Right. And I think the natural follow-up is why aren't, all of these other groups so organized, right? You've talked
Like
about the rise of kind of barstool conservatism, right? But why is there no kind of like barstool conservative movement, march for barstool conservatism?
Why should there be? What do we have to care about, right? It's like, if they ban Zinn, I have a Zinn in right now. If they ban Zinn, maybe, okay, we could talk about it. There could be something that maybe I would march to the streets for. But, in general, my description, what I just said of the bars, or what I just said about like not voting, that applies for most people in the political process. In fact, huge element of like barstool conservatism, such that there is like hating the government. It's like hating the political process.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't really want to engage in the political process. Again, I think that's defensible. In a lot of ways, what drives partisanship today is negative partisanship. So to the extent that there is like a quote unquote barstool right, a lot of it is derivative of like hating the left, right? And hating the left, or hating what leftism has quote unquote like morphed into. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're a very strong political organization, but I also don't discount the phenomenon, and that's why I think it's important to talk that way.
Right. I think that the consequence in practice, though, is that you have Trump taking things in a lot more moderate direction in many of the, many people don't consider him a moderate.
Right.
But in a lot of the practical, policy, right, on abortion, on economics and all of these issues, there is a kind of, as you put it, a realignment.
Yeah.
But the realignment in terms of messaging is not actually reflected in terms of a realignment in terms of the policy people, right? The policy people, the libertarians are still here. They did like the Trump tax cuts, the pro-life, the religious right is still here. It's sort of, it's still the same Reagan coalition.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it the Reagan coalition, but I would call it like the Reagan electorate if that makes sense. In terms of the Reagan coalition is specifically one about voters. Now, in terms of the people who are represented here in DC, you're right. I wouldn't even call it really Reagan-esque, though. It's really just corporatism. I mean, I think that's probably the most effective political instrument and lobby here in Washington, with very, very few political exceptions in terms of getting things done.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Do you think that, there are some people who are trying to change that, like Orrin Cass, right? Do you think that really there'll be any kind of landing here in DC?
Well, look, Orrin punches above his weight. I mean, relative to his small staff, his singular ability to bring attention to specific issues, like relative to the Chamber. Think about how much money the Chamber of Commerce has, and think about how much they view Orrin as a threat. That's actually pretty extraordinary. There's a big asymmetric threat there. There are people like him who certainly can punch above their weight simply because they have small d Democratic positioning behind them. But that doesn't mean, though, necessarily that they are ever going to reach the same level of political power in terms of their ability to exert things on events. The most effective strategy that they've had is not capturing, but proselytizing kind of their vision to elected officials so that they have something else in their brain when they're being counter-proselytized by the corporate lobby.
Right. So what's the mechanism of action here, right? How does Orrin punch above his weight? Is it that, if you bring like polling to some of these elected representatives, that they'll be more persuaded, or they just... Okay.
Yeah. One of the most effective things American Compass ever did was just commission a ton of polling. They commissioned a ton of polling, but that just shows the vast popularity of some of their positions. And then they showed it to people. Politicians are self-interested. Very few of them are ideological. I've met plenty of them. They're ideological on a few things. Boomers are very like on Russia, for example. Like, oh,
Right, right.
Russia is bad. It's just always bad. But the younger ones, they mostly get it. But in general, for a lot of politicians, they are ideological, let's say on maybe one or two things. Everything else, they don't give a shit. They just want to go, they want to get reelected, or they want to be popular, or what they want more than anything is to be famous. That's what a lot of people don't understand, is that most of these people, Bill Clinton really was onto something when he said that DC is Hollywood for ugly people. And I think there is something deep, especially in the modern desire of the lawmaker. These people, they want recognition more than anything you can possibly imagine. So to the extent that they take policy positions at all, it's because they want their face in the camera. They want the headlines. They want the attention. That's it. That's what they want.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
He sort of epitomizes the cable TV era.
Yes.
And we're moving to a very different media environment now with social media. Do you think that's made the problem worse?
I don't know. Well, it's very hard to say better or worse. So, in the cable news era, this is why there's pluses and minuses. This is why I would put it. There's trade-offs to everything. In the monolith era, you could have Walter Cronkite being like, it doesn't seem possible that America can win this war, and American support for the war just like plummets overnight, right? That's crazy. Imagine that. There's no singular news figure that would ever have that level of like democratic input or sway over the populace. But one of the things that you start to learn, and people have a lot of nostalgia for that time period, but the propaganda and the shaping and the censorship was just as bad then as it is today. So it's just you didn't know,
Right,
you had no
exactly.
ability to go around and to talk. It's like the JFK assassination thing is the perfect example. The vast majority of people thought there was a conspiracy. They just never really got their day in popular media until Oliver Stone put out a movie in 1992. There were tons of books or a lot of conferences and stuff, but mainstream representation was zero. It was nil. Cable expanded that a little bit. In my opinion, it's hard to say again whether it made things better or worse. It fragmented. That's all we can say. And then social media has only further increased fragmentation. There has never been more information today. Arguably, you're never more informed about the democratic process than you are today. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but it is true in terms of your ability to access information. But the counter is that the information, by having so much information, we're almost less informed about the process. By having so much going on, people tune out because they feel like there's too much to be able to cover and they just can't get a handle on it. It was actually easier in the era of Nightline to just have a 30-minute report on what you were supposed to digest. Roger Ailes, who I often quote because it's funny. Yeah, he was a bad guy, all right? But he was probably one of the great political geniuses of our time. Now, he used it for, in some cases, nefarious purposes, but he said something which I'll never forget in the formation of Fox News. He said, people don't want to be informed. They want to feel informed. Right. And there is something so deeply insightful about that quote.
Yeah. And something I'm really interested in here that I don't think has been talked about often is the effect in the other direction. I think not only are the voters more informed about the politicians, but the politicians are more informed about the voters. Like Nate Silver's kind of polling model was considered, revolutionary in 2012, even more so, gaining steam in like 2016. Mm-hmm. Modern day political analytics, I think, is just something that, I mean, the criticism of it would be that it strips away the aspect of leadership.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this is the other thing. There's a lot of noise, but you never know what. I'll give this example. Because we cover politics for a living. In 2022, the rule of thumb from 2018 from 2020 was that you should never underestimate Republican support in the polls. And so when you see a GOP wave being forecast, I actually would add on top of that, right? Because in the recent history, we have a recency bias where we're like, well, Republican support was really understated. It didn't seem like modern polling models were able to update from 2016, from 2018 for Republican support. So I actually priced more in. What happened? The opposite, because of abortion. Now, in 2024, we have crazy signals. We have Biden unpopularity. We have so much thing. By any conventional metric, as you would have in 2022, you would say that Biden is not going to do well in the general election. But we have enough recent data to say maybe there's a chance that things could be different. That's why it's really important to never take even the vast amount of noise that we have at our disposal and say that it is absolutely a forecast of what's happening. And to your point about leadership, the most analogous to the election to the one that we have today, I actually think is 1948, where the dynamics are. I mean, the press, including me, we are very, very down on the sitting president. There's high inflation. We're in a weird transitionary period. I'm talking about Harry Truman, the Dewey and Truman
Right.
election. The press basically, was all in the tank for Dewey, and they were like, "Yeah, he's definitely going to win. There's no chance." At certain points, I think the FBI was like approaching Thomas Dewey, being like, "Hey, if you want us to spy on Truman, like go for it," because they wanted to curry favor with the current administration. And then everybody's shocked when Truman wins. And been a lot of analysis around there. But if Biden does win, and if he defies a lot of things, it will be a 1948 style victory, I think. And
Right. Oh, I
that's
think
interesting to
Biden
think
is
about.
the okay.
Yeah, he's the
Biden.
Truman, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting. So I don't know. Is is the press going to call it wrong?
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I like to think, at least in my case, I have a lot of humility with polling and with forecasting. 2020 2016 taught me everything. Taught me to never trust the experts. 2020 really hammered that home. 2022 makes you deeply humble, even about recency bias. So you really should just say, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Right. And you mentioned the experts there. I think the fragmentation that happened, yeah, despite people being more informed, it led to kind of a panic about people being misinformed.
Yeah.
Right. Something that's not not remotely a new problem. Do you think that this is mostly a kind of elite driven or like institution driven thing? We've all seen like the Stanford Center Against Disinformation or so
Right.
on and so forth, or like even among Democrats. Is there
Right.
any organic support among Democrats for this?
I don't know. I think so. I think there is I've always traced the misinformation scare to one thing. People, especially elite liberals, genuinely cannot understand how people could have voted for Trump. They don't
Right.
get it, right? They actually don't get it. And so, especially people who used to vote Democrat and who vote for Trump. So in their heads, the only way that's possible is if they were tricked into doing so. That's fundamentally where it all comes down to. Misinformation, the entire scare, all comes back to a lack of belief in democratic ideals.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Jacob Siegel,
Mm,
brought up the philosopher John Gray in his book, like the two faces of liberalism. Right? There's one idea that the democratic process is is there because it's always going to get to the right answer, right? That the people are kind of rational actors, that they're going to that they're going to vote for the candidate that's best for them. And then there's another, he presents the other face of it as it's a way of resolving conflict between people who aren't rational actors, who don't who believe in things, who have sentiments, who have emotions, but that it's still nonetheless the best way for settling these disputes. So if you accept that frame, and let me know if you don't,
mm.
uh, how did we go from, I think, a country that in many times in history has accepted that the second type of liberalism, that people, I may not necessarily agree with them, I may think that they're misinformed, but it's the best way to run a country, to I think now a sentiment not just on the left but also on the right of this kind of elitism of saying if the people are wrong, then maybe we shouldn't have this process to begin with.
Yeah, I don't think really all that much has changed at all. I think the country
Hmm.
is pretty much exactly the same, and we just go through various ebbs and flows. So if you go back to the Gilded Age, it's
Right.
actually not that different at all from where we are right now. You had complete machine politics. You had guys like Mark Hanna and others who went to war with Teddy Roosevelt all throughout the early 1900s, the era to try and crush any sort of modern democratic sentiment, to totally capture the political process. A lot of people forget how insane politics was when senators were not directly elected. When they were elected through state legislatures, there was some crazy shenanigans happening in terms of buying off seats. And I mean, a lot of people don't know this. William Randolph Hearst, who was the newspaper baron, his father was one of the richest people in the state of California. He was a gold miner. He just randomly decided he wanted to be a senator, and he died as senator to the United States from California. He just bought his way in. He just bribed the right people. That type of system was deeply and fundamentally much more like antithetical to like small d democracy. Same thing, with a lot of Reconstruction era politics. I mean, think about it at that time. People really did not have a let's live and let live. I may disagree. They're like, no, I'm going to militarily occupy your territory and force you to comply because you lost the war. And then vice versa. A lot of people in the South did not accept at all fundamentally the idea of not only in terms of being vanquished, but they did not accept like overall democratic sentiment. They very much saw it as a way to preserve their way of life and what they want, and to use any power at their disposal, both legal and illegal, to try and revert back to a system that they were in control of. So there's just been an ebb and flow for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love this analogy because, Reconstruction was a period of time where people had that moral fire under them, and I think that you can look at it. You can look at today. Not to buy into the left wing framing of it. I don't think anyone is nearly as racist as they were
obviously
back then. But it is a situation where I think that the left has won the economic war.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It is a kind of like left occupied America, and they are trying to do reconstruction of a sorts, right? I do see that as being the analogy.
Yeah, you're right. They do see it that way, and it's actually very dangerous, right? Because one of the problems is a misreading of history. I talk about this with the Ukraine all the time. If everything is Munich, then nothing is Munich, right? Munich is supposed to be Munich, and we're always you can see you're like, well, what if it's the Winter War? What if it's not Munich? What if it's relitigating some? What if it's Alsace-Lorraine between France and Germany? They're like, what if we can reach for a ton of other different historical analogies in the way that we think about this? Then things become much grayer. They become a little bit more different. So when we apply that to American politics, the fundamental problem with American politics is the way history is, especially liberals genuinely believe in, this is not an original idea, but like post civil rights America is the only America that exists. Like the idea of like the Civil Rights Act is 1964 as being a genuine new founding. I think that is actually correct in terms of a lot of liberal framing, both of the justice system and of their conception of the U.S. and the entire like fundamental idea, like the arc of moral justice always been source history and all of that. Like that's the only America they know. From a domestic political
Martin
point of
Luther
view.
King actually is the founding father.
Exactly.
Right?
He is the founding father, right? Like the only founding father. He was building on the legacy. It's like, well, it's complicated, all right?
Yeah.
Same thing with foreign policy. It's like foreign policy of the U.S. begins in 1945. It never existed before that. The arguments post World War I, throughout the 1920s and 30s, not to mention the fucking Monroe Doctrine and all of the arguments between, the Louisiana Purchase, like, oh, no, that's irrelevant. That's ancient history. It's like America is the world occupying power. Like we are the American empire of today has always existed. It can never not exist. It has to be. It's like, no. These are actually questions we've all litigated before, just in a time period that you don't know anything about and that you don't even think about in terms of how and what we should deal with. That's why I think recency bias and this like historical framing amongst elite liberals is the most dangerous thing about them, is that it's not only that they're ahistorical, it's that they're ignorant.
Right. And it gives them a sense of confidence that maybe is beneficial in political terms, right? It inspires them to run for office, run executive offices, work as policy staff, right? The kind of motivation difference. Richard Hanania has reported this out, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the willingness to donate, willingness to act, willingness to do all of these kind of basically machinery of politics things is just wildly different. So I guess the question is like, what is the origin of this confidence? Is it media driven? Is it more kind of institution driven, that there's more left wing foundations and think tanks and so on and universities, or is it more kind of like something in the voter base?
It's multifaceted. I mean, look, they genuinely did win. between 1945 and 1965, that's going to be the best winning. Think about it, too. They were out of power for a long time, man. I mean, until Franklin
Right.
Roosevelt came into town in 1933, like they ruled this town, and they had the small, the Southern Democrats, the more conservatives, capitals, small c in terms of their orientation. They really were the cemented power until Roosevelt came along, and even he had to really work. He had a lot of intra-coalitional problems, especially on race and many other things that he fought. That's why he was such a master politician, was he was able to move the ball forward and also handle a lot of these issues without feeling like he was succumbing to Congress. But move past that. I mean, these guys really did win titanic victories from a political point of view. That's where I think a lot of it comes from. But second is the managerial revolution. You can't discount, the rebalance of American economic power and the consolidation of the vast majority of gains into their pockets. So they're rich, they're successful, they're more educated than other people. You can see where it comes from. And then they pass that on, through selective, like in-group sorting, both in terms of where they live and who they marry and with their kids. And then the children of that generation are raised in a milieu which is just totally different.
Yeah, and how this gets resolved, right? You mentioned FDR, also LBJ. You can see that a lot of these realignments happen in not just with great men of history, but kind of like great liars of history.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
I was going through the Caro biographies again. Right. LBJ would just go to the South and say, I am going to limit civil rights as much as possible. This bill like dies with me. Right.
Funny thing about Caro, I don't actually know where I stand on this question. Caro really believes that LBJ believed a lot of what he said about civil rights near the end. I'm not so sure I believe it. I don't know if he ever believed anything, to be honest. I think he had flashes of humanity, and I think that's where sometimes some of the civil rights action came from, but he wasn't an idiot. He knew about the political benefit of it. And to the extent that he would also engage in some of these political fights, he did it, and this is what Caro nails, to the extent that if he did care, it had to always align with ego, it had to align with political benefit, and it had to align with you were willing to engage in the fight and exercise power for an immense gain there on the other side. And if all three of those things aligned, then he would do it. FDR was exactly the same. Remember, FDR very correctly called that LBJ would be president. He said, I think that young man is going to be president today. FDR, in my opinion, LBJ is probably the greatest politician of our time. It's not even fair to call FDR a politician because, honestly, he was a king. He was a monarch of this country.
Yeah.
He is like a Napoleon III type. I mean, he was basically a dictator, in a lot of ways, for better or for worse. I think for better. But, we got to grapple with that. I think about it sometimes. I mean, there was basically a military coup in this country from 1944 to 1945. FDR was drooling out of the left side of his mouth. He stopped engaging in war politics. He was bedridden, and they ran his ass for a fourth term. And he won.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. That's actually he only lived 83 days into his fourth term. That's actually genuinely criminally negligent, from a democratic perspective. But he was that good. He could do it.
I mean, the point that I want to stick on is that I'm not sure if that kind of lying is possible today, right? If Trump might be known for lying about some things, but I'm not sure he's going to all of the corporate organizations and saying free trade. We will have the most free trade.
Trump had the ability if he wanted to. He just never cared. Trump really just doesn't care about policy at all. I mean, he's LBJ-esque in the way that he's like all of his political fortunes are just about him personally, like in terms of his ego.
Yeah, and it works, right? You draw attention to the trials,
right?
And many people argue that's how he got such high votes in the nomination.
I agree. Listen, I mean, he's the best politician I think of my lifetime. There's no question about it. In terms of his singular ability to capture a portion of the American public and like believe that he is their savior. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. It's not that easy to do. Obama's probably had flashes of what you're talking about. Early Obama. I mean, remember when Obama in 2007 would be like, nah, I don't believe in gay marriage. And it was like, dude, you obviously believe in gay marriage. Like, what I mean? Like, but he would just lie. And he actually got away with it. He got himself elected with a pretty extraordinary electoral victory in 2008. But he lost some of that, actually, whenever he became president. I wonder what happened with Obama. What a fascinating, multifaceted man. He was also a great politician, I would say, in 2008. But something about, I think he was maybe just too liberal. Maybe he was too ideological. Maybe that's what happened.
He didn't want it
Yeah.
enough. He wasn't narcissistic enough. I'm actually not sure. Do you think that someone like an LBJ figure could come along and just lie and create the realignment by sheer force of will?
Well, remember, it's not just about being a liar or being two-faced or wanting power for any sake of it. There's a lot of people like that. Okay, this is Washington. What FDR and LBJ and Nixon all had was the extraordinary political IQ, the extraordinary ability to see what nobody else could see. And that, I don't know. I do think it's still possible. I mean, I live here in DC. I created my own company, right? Like I saw something and tried something different from what a lot of other people have done. So, I mean, it can be done on a micro scale. I'm not comparing myself. I'm just like, the ability to disrupt, quote unquote. When I moved here in 2000 and when I came to college here in 2010, and you were going to tell somebody that, somebody who was my age could create like a large political show, people would get, you're out of your fucking mind. It's never going to happen.
Right.
So my point is that like political entrepreneurship is actually probably the skill you want to foster more than anything. And what I mean by that, though, a lot of people misunderstand that, is they want to come here and they want to do something different immediately. But what characterized the two of them is that they swam in the existing political system. They absorbed, like through osmosis, all of the bullshit, and then saw their ability to like swim through different things and create something new on the other side. And I think that's really what it takes, is the ability to like see things as they are, but to be deeply dissatisfied with it. That's really, if you think about FDR, it was his governorship of, people always point to his governorship of New York, but he was forged as the political animal he was from his Navy experience, from whenever he was the assistant secretary of the Navy and he was trying to get things done then. That's how he really understood bureaucratic power. So when you combine his democratic abilities to get elected and the vision of like the New Deal and all that, with also though by hiring the best guns around him to be able to push shit through the bureaucracy, that's how you have a great president like FDR. That's how you have a great president like
Right,
LBJ as well.
Like this is the same trend as Napoleon, right? He was a true believer in meritocracy.
Right.
He understood the kind of patronage campaign, but understood how to use it in a way that kind of was more meritocratic, was far more meritocratic.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't mentioned Lincoln enough in this, and this is the other problem. The Disney version of Lincoln is not Lincoln, and that's why I love Lincoln. Lincoln was just like these guys, the master politician, one of the greatest who's ever lived. I mean, the ability to balance, both to be a true believer, but again, he's dealing with these fucking radical Republicans. They won't shut the fuck up about, you need to sign the Emancipation Proclamation on day one of the Civil War. And he's got all those great quotes. He's like, I'd like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. He's like one of those where his ability to balance that coalition, to slowly move it along to where it needed to be, and to strike exactly when the population was ready, but also to keep things, I mean, at certain points he was very unpopular in his president, but to keep his dedication to the war, his belief that things would work out, the balancing of the generals, the balancing of his cabinet and of Congress, it's one of the great American stories, man. He's a genius level politician.
What do you think of the attempted Sam Altman coup?
What do you mean by that? Of society, of the economy?
No. So Sam Altman was like temporarily, was temporarily ousted by CSET people.
You would know more than I do. What do you think about it? Like, what was the true motivation behind it? Because I've seen a lot of differing.
I think they were true believers.
In what? And what did they believe?
AI safety.
Okay.
Like EA, like not like the dumb version, not like the woke version. Like AI is going to end the world. Like that is what the people at CSET believe. That is what I think. I don't know her personally, but that is what I think Helen Toner believed. What several other board members believed. Probably what Ilya Sutskever believed. In Ilya's case, he's written about this, right? He's spoken with Dwarkesh about it, or he's very unambiguous about what he believes. He believes that AI has a risk of like killing everyone. And I do think that was the genuine motivation. I was asking more from the perspective of kind of how quickly and how like thoroughly Sam Altman built loyalty throughout the company.
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's
Yeah.
pretty extraordinary. See, you're going to know more about it than I do. I'm just an outside observer in terms of what I see. I don't really know what to make of Sam Altman. I will be honest, I distrust him just from an outside level because of exactly what you were talking about, kind of these AI safety concerns. I see too much lip service to this. I mean, I think of it as maybe I'm extremely naive. I'm not afraid of AI. And I kind of got this from Mark Andreessen when he's like, look, AI is a computer, you can turn it off. And it's one of those where maybe I'm extremely naive, but I think a lot of this like matrix level worry about AGI replacing us and going rogue and all that, like maybe, yeah, maybe, but I don't think the risk is as high as people say. Now, will it fundamentally transfer our lives? Yeah, I do, but I think the human agency is still going to remain in a primal spot, at least for the foreseeable future. That's kind of what I think.
I think like John Asconis put it best. We're here at FAI. That it's a kind of eschatological belief. It's the new book of Revelations.
Yeah.
That if you get sharp progress increasing, you don't actually have to think about the end of that story. You don't have to think about the consequences of that story. Actually, it just goes to infinity, right? The intelligence just keeps going. It goes to infinity until it can take over the world. There's no like human craft there, right? Which I think is just wrong. I mean, I have a partial series on this. One talking about the limits to hardware improvement. Two, this is going to come out very soon. That there's this whole Silicon Valley ideology of once we start funding these companies, once they get product market fit, then it's a huge scientific revolution. And maybe AI will prove us wrong. It's certainly promising in some areas, but through the large part of history, that's just not true.
Yeah.
That and I'm not detracting. I'm not saying people aren't gonna make money off of investing in AI. Nvidia stocks going very well. I think it's going to go very well for the venture capitalists and for the startup founders and so on. But the idea that this loops back into exponential scientific development, like, do you see that with like U.S. Steel? Do you see that with Google? Right, PageRank is not some magically better algorithm. It's worse, I don't think, due to their fault, due to like people doing SEO. But I don't think the search algorithms are particularly improved. And you can go throughout Silicon Valley history, throughout industrial history, and it's just not the case. That this idea that there's going to be an infinite boom in machine learning research, I think it's just it's ahistorical, and it's like you said, it's overconfidence.
I totally agree. I'm with you. I think people need to just have this. I see this everywhere in everything. Something I've started a lot is defense. And in defense, one of the most, so for years and years and years, do you know what the revolution in military affairs is?
No.
Okay, so it's RMA. It's like this idea that warfare has fundamentally changed at a baseline technological level. And it was really became popular after the Gulf War, after the U.S. defeated Saddam Hussein so handily. Because I don't know if you remember or have read about this, but the U.S. war planners and others expected like thousands and thousands of American casualties. And like the total number was like 300. Shocked the world. I said, holy shit, this is it. Everything has changed. And yet, what have we really learned from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? How much did technology really fundamentally alter the reality for the troops on the ground? And when I look at Ukraine, for example, what's the number one bottleneck in Ukraine right now? Ammunition production. The same bottleneck that the First World War faced, right? The same exact problem. Oh, shit, we're firing a lot more ammo than we thought we were. Gonna have to spin up our whole economy into total war in order to pump out more shells. It's unbelievable. It's a century-old problem, and it's the exact same thing. Now, drones, certainly, drones have changed the game and all that. And everyone's like, in America, of course, I think what we fall victim to is like the magic bullet theory in a way where we're like, oh, well, we'll create this one really high-tech drone. Something I've been thinking about a lot in a Second World War context, and nobody really remembers, is, the Nazis had jets in World War II? In 1945 or so, they had jet engine technology that were going 500-600 miles an hour. We had these piddly-ass B-17s and B-29 bombers, which were outdated compared to them. You know why, though, that we won? We just blew 100 of them out of the sky, and they couldn't manufacture them at scale, where we could manufacture thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. And it's like, there's a real lesson in that, right? In terms of a deep overconfidence at that time. I mean, a lot of this is Hitler's fault, too. But a deep overconfidence in technological advancement, or like this ability for magic technology, the V1, the V2, and all of that, that would somehow completely change the tide. And it was like, no, not really. And in a way, the atomic bomb has scrambled the way that we think about this, because we all think that it's the atomic bomb is the only reason that Japan surrendered, right? And it's like, no,
Mm,
that's ludicrous. They were basically on the verge of it already. Curtis LeMay, the actual the creator of the father of the firebombing campaign, he believed they would have surrendered anyway by October, and that's one of the reasons we hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's one of the only two cities that were left that haven't been
right.
burned to the ground. They were already on the verge of total societal collapse, of the same, in revolt, and as to why. And then a lot of people don't know this, but it wasn't just the bomb. People forget the Soviet Union also had invaded Manchuria and had declared war on Japan, the historical enemy. They could clearly see the manpower and all that coming. Sure, the atomic bomb pushed them over the top, but it wasn't. If we had dropped the bomb, let's say 6 months earlier in the course of the Pacific War, there's no way they would have surrendered. Impossible. And so, more what I'm saying is we underrate all of the just very nuts and bolts, boring, traditional industrial warfare that actually led to that. And we overrate scientific advancement completely pushing things over the edge. Like, it was just the boring, not all that technologically advanced parts of the war. That's actually what won the war in both
Right.
cases.
Maybe that's the answer, but I'm not
Yeah.
completely sure. Like, there's this narrative about the military industrial complex, right? That they always want to overproduce and fight more wars.
Mhm.
Why is there a shortage? Is it because of this? They're focusing on high tech stuff.
Yeah,
Or
this is a mind infection inside of the Pentagon. Is like, we need
okay,
this like super advanced stuff. It's like, no, you really don't. Yeah, advanced stuff is cool, but at the end of the day, like, that's not how you win a war. Like, again, just look at the B-17 example. It's like, the ability to, and B-29, just pump them out. B-29 barely even worked. We're still able to do it properly. What it comes back to is a deep overconfidence and runaway. These programs suck money. These, like the F-35 program, anything deeply more technologically advanced, they're highly profitable for the military industrial complex and for the defense companies themselves. Build ammunition is not profitable because this is something we know how to do at scale and have been doing for over a century. Like, there's not a lot of profit margin within that. But building a fancy new navigation system or a helmet where you need two eyes to operate different things, and it's cool, right? And you can pour a lot of money in that. My point just being that people, there's always arguments about defense spending. I think we do spend too much on defense. And what I mean by that is we spend it completely on the wrong stuff. I think we could spend maybe 2/3 or even a third of what we spend right now and be far better prepared. It's just that we spend it on the wrong shit. We barely produce ammunition, but we've got enough F-35s till the cow comes home with all the crazy cool software and all of that. But is that really what's going to win? The war planners in Washington want you to think that. I don't think that at all, based on recent experience.
right.
Yeah.
And is this a problem of ignorance, or is this a problem of kind of incentives?
Incentives, ignorance. A lot of it, comes back to what we were just talking about, the idea of this, like, post 1945, like the narratives that take hold. And look, I think technology is amazing. Like, please don't get me wrong or view it that way. I just think we should never underestimate, like, the very basics, principles and there's just too much hubris in always thinking that something is new and something is different and something this time this will turn the tide. One of the things you always learn or see all throughout warfare is you revert to the mean very quickly in terms of old and traditional lessons. Technology certainly plays a role, and it certainly will change in the way that people fight. But the fighting itself, and the reason I look at war is because it's the ultimate battleground, right? Where field test ideas and see what works and what doesn't, and you try certain different things. But I think it has deep application at societal wide level too.
It seems like that intergenerationally, the kind of self confidence decreases, right? You get people with anxiety disorders
Mhm.
who have like social anxiety, but the confidence in the ideology increases, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I think almost all of that is just derivative of cell phones. And I'm starting to really just believe that. There's all this data that's come out about teenagers who just, like, don't hang out with each other. I mean, there's a myriad amount of data now at this point. Like, every signal that we could possibly need to show that phones have fundamentally altered the way that young people live their lives. I think probably for worse. You'll see the rates of sex, for kids who are under 18 has gone down. The rates of people hanging out, the rates of even men who are our age who rate the number of close friends. Everything is dramatically just gone down. And one of the things that you really learn about that, again, is that technology did not, save us. Think back to, you and I are probably old enough to remember the original promises of Facebook, and it might to be more
Yeah,
connected.
the Arab Spring.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about being more connected. It's about making us more democratically involved. It's about, connecting and fostering the human experience. And instead, it just frankly undermined the human experience. Let's be honest. I don't begrudge them. They do what they need. They sell a lot of advertising, so good for them. They're actually doing what they're designed to do. But for us, from an individual standpoint, I think that's really where a lot of it comes from.
I think sort of it is that, you actually don't really want to be informed about your fellow American, that like the less informed you are about your fellow. I think that like in the past few decades, certainly for my entire lifetime, kind of truth and goodness have been equated, right?
That's a good point.
That, or like goodness and knowledge, just like the more the more advanced information you have, and I certainly, I'm someone who has not escaped this, right?
No one has. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't live in the world and have. Sometimes I forget where I was. I was somewhere, and I think something happened. I think I was at the gym, and I was working out, and I saw Mitch McConnell had retired. And I said, "Wow, man, holy shit!" And I just sat there and thought about it for 5 minutes, and then I'm like, "Why do I need to know this working out at the gym?" It's like this is not. I should not be taking time out of my workout, being around the people I'm working out with, and just thinking about Mitch McConnell retiring. That actually, it does have a bearing on my life, like professionally, but is that really going to impact like what's happening like right now in that moment? I've thought about that ever since, like in the last day or so, just to think like, why did I do that? I probably shouldn't have done that. And like you just said, in terms of knowledge, it's like, this is goodness. It's like, well, maybe, yeah. But time and when and how and scale and all of that matters too, in terms of how we should, responsibly govern ourselves.
The big question is how it translates over to these kind of institutional mechanisms, right? I think Abigail Schreier is out with a new book about how therapy kind of introduces dependency, hurts kids more than it helps. I do think there is something pernicious about kind of modern optimization methods applied to everything. Like obviously there's good as well. I'd much rather have cheaper groceries, so on and so forth, right? But that these modern optimization methods apply to either politics or media or social media. And there's a big question, both on the left and the right, one of the few bipartisan big questions left is, can these optimization functions ever be abandoned, right? Do we ever get off the social media algorithm?
I don't know. I mean, again, I can sit here and talk about all the downsides. I wouldn't even be sitting here without social media. I think about that all the time. I owe my entire career to the algorithm. So is it really responsible for me to trash the algorithm? Is it really responsible for me to trash, the greatest way to circumvent institutional power invented in the last 25 years? I'm freer. I'm freer and have more ability to speak my mind than if I lived in the 1990s, which is counter-narrative, very counter-narrative if you think about it.
Right.
And, in a way, we've never had more free speech than we ever have right now. But that's also part of the reason why free speech is under attack. And then kind of what the overall balance of what we want to preserve is. I just think that my vision for like what I really want in the future is, and I've really come down to this, is the open. If you go back and you read some of the hopes of the early internet guys in the 1990s, it was such a utopian vision. And I think they were on to something. And something went wrong with the consolidation of the web. I don't know if I buy into so much of the hype right now around decentralization and all of that, as in some of the individual ways that is playing out. But the mission and the intellectual, like the value statement behind it, I think they are correct.
Yeah, I mean that's, we'll wrap up with this. I think that's what AI really stands for, because AI is something that enables or like small business size scaling on the individual and industrial size scaling on a small team.
That's great.
Right? If you look at Salesforce, right, a forward projection of the early kind of AI business system that all of these kind of menial tasks, right? This is something that I think conservatives really miss, is that, technologies can take away meaningful tasks or like really menial tasks.
Yes.
And I think far and away that's what AI is doing, at least at the current level. That the kind of, HR compliance is the most
Ugh.
obvious example, filling in your tax form, right? All of these things, you've covered the kind of tax agencies being opposed to this, right? That all of these all of these things that are kind of like optional obstacles in most people's lives are removed. And I think that this is actually why why kind of like established interests hate AI so much, is that their power really is dependent on these kind of optional variables.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about it that way. I think you're absolutely right, which is that it's a huge part of the menial, like the bullshit industrial complex from
Exactly.
DEI, but also, like you just said, in terms of, a good example, and this is why I can't hate on technology. When I started my business, I would be fucked if I was in the year 2007. Like, I started my LLC and all that on Stripe Atlas. It cost me $500 to file my paperwork to start Breaking Points. This is a real story, right? Like, I filled out a form, and this company handled it all for me. Years ago, it would have cost me probably 10 times the amount of money. I would have had to hire a lawyer and all this other stuff. No, I don't have to do any of that, right? And that's actually amazing. Like, we should celebrate that. That's an amazing accomplishment, which removed friction, which enabled me to become an entrepreneur and to own my own business, which has now worked out very well. And that's the point, is that we want to use AI to replace a lot of, one thing I think about all the time too is like real estate transactions. Like, the fact that, when you buy a house, like, you have to go to a title agency in person.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what is up with it? This is bullshit, right? This is one of those where I'm like, who are you? What are you getting paid for? Exactly? To sit here and watch me sign papers? Really? What's up with this? That is exactly where I do. And I think the vast majority of people do want to see, replacement, or we want to see a change. But these small, like, guild cartels that are exactly the ones who don't want to be replaced in that function. So, at a certain level, some job replacement is good. It's just about targeting and thinking about the different ways that we can.
Yeah, I mean, these people better than I do. Do they really? I think the meme that goes around is that, like, when programmers see their work being automated, they're like, "This is great. This is wonderful."
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're excited for it. But do these people, do these bureaucrats really like their jobs? Do they?
I like the power, right? I mean, that's really what gives. The more menial your job, the more it helps. The copium is like, I'm making a difference, or I'm making an impact, or I'm doing this and that. I mean, don't ever discount that. The individual desire to rule over others is strong, and that's where a huge portion of this all comes from. Especially if you can imbue yourself with some social responsibility, and then maybe add in a little bit of money and some be complex and all of that. You're looking at a very powerful entrenched interest. That's what this whole city is built on. That's what the whole nonprofit industrial complex, which is responsible for tens of thousands of people who are working in this city, doing absolutely nothing. That's the fundamentals of it, where it all goes back to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how do you think this plays out in DC? There's the executive agencies in the current branch, the Biden executive order, and then there's like Congress, right? How do you see, like, AI does seem to be a toss-up. It doesn't seem to fit that easily into either party's narrative.
Unfortunately, I think the most likely course is exactly what happened with social media. I think that is the most.
See.
I think that is the most. So, like I said, almost everything reverts to the mean absent change. Washington is not interested in change, to the extent that anything is happening right now is what we're seeing: massive AI consolidation with the existing big tech companies. And I know, look, there has been, it's interesting to see the startup and all that, but OpenAI, came out of nowhere, and like ChatGPT, and then what happened? Fucking Microsoft came in. It's like, okay, now it's just part of it's basically an arm of Microsoft, right? And then Google, and
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, well, what do you think?
I don't think OpenAI is completely loyal to Microsoft.
Okay.
I think that Sam Altman and the team still retains like some level of independence.
Okay.
I do think, that they.
But the enterprise applications are going to go to Microsoft now.
Yeah, for sure. The distribution will be there.
Well, that's powerful, though, for Microsoft.
For sure.
My point, though, is that they're inextricably linked to the largest technology company in the world, yeah? In terms of where we're at right now.
I would say that the point that I disagree with is the idea that kind of like Sam Altman or like OpenAI is like directly under their thumb.
Fair enough. I think that's a fair point. I'm just looking at it organizationally. But then I think about where all of the massive investment is happening and where all the technological advancement, as I understand it, is happening right now is within these concentrated tech companies. Now, the reason that's very convenient for DC is we know these people, Google, Facebook, you've been around the block. So here's an executive order and here's the laws that we're going to pass and just keep doing what you're doing, but do it within this framework. We all know each other. So instead of looking at it as a new ecosystem, I think Washington is looking at it and will allow it to continue to massive network effects that get monopolized into a few companies, which are very easy to control. That's easier than a bunch of other different startups, who knows, doing whatever, what. Oh, wait, they created a deep fake image of this. Oh, we can't have that. It's way easier to have to have 2 image generators than have 10,000.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
This is the pernicious effect that I keep
Yeah.
pointing to. Quote unquote antitrust policy is actually more focused on creating like a few consolidated firms and then like poking those firms in a direction. That is bleak, but I think that I'm more optimistic. I don't think the network effects are nearly as natural. I think that the cost of compute scaling pretty much is one factor that goes in the other direction. But
What do you mean?
oh, so like,
because as I understand it, you need a shitload of money to play in this space.
yeah,
From the chips and from the server and all that. Seems why it naturally, initially, is going to gravitate to the big tech companies because they have the money to burn.
right. So how it works is that there's
Yeah.
kind of like multiple ways you can achieve performance increases, right?
Uh-huh.
You can either improve by adding more inputs, right? Adding
Mhm.
more compute. But this actually scales. It scales according to the square root of the inputs, right?
Okay.
So basically, for every input you put in, right, you're getting less performance as it goes out. And the other way to kind of improve, or there's more than one way, but the other way to improve is to kind of narrow down your application.
Oh.
So this lets you create a kind of smaller model
Uh-huh.
using far less compute, but still actually performs better at this narrower range of tasks.
Interesting.
Right. And you have these other basically like derivative style implementations of machine learning where you take something like Llama, right? Facebook's publicly released open source model and just tweak it a little bit, specialize it. And the bulk of the compute has already been done, right? Facebook had the generosity of doing that ahead of time. And then you essentially like specialize it through these kind of second stage optimizations for specific tasks. And that's also like a more efficient way to do it. Absolutely agree. On the other hand, just the kind of scaling, the kind of, especially like the distribution, if you have Microsoft levels of distribution, that's always going to be something that's very hard to compete with. So I do see both sides of it. I'm not, completely certain on the idea that, it's going to be a kind of startup friendly thing naturally. But I do think it's not just one sided.
Got it. Well, you're more of an expert than I am. I look to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, so in DC, is this just going to be Section 230 again?
Yeah, I think so. I actually brought that up the other day. I think it's the most likely scenario is like we are going to look. Remember, these people are old. They don't know anything. They know what they're told. They don't think about it that deeply. I'm young and I barely understand it. And we are on the verge of something cutting edge. So, but in general, given the players who are involved, I think social media 2.0 is the most likely path that we follow. And then there will be some election where it has a major impact, let's say 8 years from now, and then we will all fight over policy then. But by then, these players are so established and well networked and all that the trenches are dug and the hopes of something that we could do today are long, long gone. But that's how DC works. I mean, we never do something when it should be. It's always after the fact. It's probably designed that way. In some respects, it's not really your job to precede problems. It's like your job to solve them afterwards. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Saagar.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You had such an amazing show at Breaking Points. In part thanks to Stripe.
Shout out to Stripe.
Yeah, and certainly my life doing this podcast and doing Alliance for the Future has been a lot easier due to technology as well.
Cool.
And just thanks again.
Hey, thank you for having me.
I hope you liked my conversation with Saagar Enjeti. If you did, the number one thing you can do to help the show is to let a friend know, either in person or online. There's many people out there for whom there's nothing quite like your personal recommendation. And hopefully you're not just helping us, but giving your friend something interesting and informative to listen to. You can also help us out by subscribing to the Substack, where you'll get another post-podcast episode and lots of other paid content. Of course, you can also subscribe for free in order to get this podcast, as well as some free articles on the Substack as well. You can also help us out by leaving a comment and suggesting future guests. And like I said at the beginning, I'm starting officially a new venture right now, which is Alliance for the Future, a nonprofit that really tries to act on some of the most important issues that I've talked about on this podcast. So, as I said before, donations greatly appreciated. Helping us out with media, either by writing a story or just giving a retweet, that also helps as well. Anything you can do, I'm very grateful for. And of course, if you want another great episode, you can subscribe right here to this podcast, and you'll get one next Monday. See you then.